AI solutions could help us solve the long-standing challenges from financial inclusion to education to healthcare development without having to tread the exact path advanced economies actually took. By contrast, in advanced economies with aging populations and a diminishing labor force, AI may offer a different solution, sustaining productivity and offsetting labor supply shortages. With the right digital infrastructure, policy support and investment in human capital, EMDEs could leverage AI to accelerate development. Without these foundations, the digital divide may widen existing inequalities. I look forward to a dynamic discussion, and thank you very much for your attention. I would now hand over to Minister Champagne, the Minister of Finance from Canada, whom I believe is your first official visit to South Africa, and or at the very least to this province of KwaZulu-Natal. Minister, over to you.
I know, Governor is always amazing. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here in South Africa, and you're right, Governor. First, thank you for an inspiring introduction this morning. It's always inspiring to listen to our South African friends and governors of central bank, I must say. You laid out the land very well, and you're right, it is my first official visit in this part of South Africa. It's my third visit, I think, in South Africa, and bilaterally we were just in Cape Town before to talk to our South African friends. Let me say, ladies and gentlemen, for those watching at home as well, you have an amazing panel this morning. You have the brain, the people are going to lay out the foundation for the future, and I would just want to commend our South African friends for starting this great G20, and thank you for hosting us in beautiful South Africa. Waking up in Africa, Governor, I can tell you, makes all of us smile this morning. Just watching and being here. There's something special about Africa that I must say is a real pleasure, not only for me as the Finance Minister of Canada, but also as the Chair of the Finance Minister of the G7. And I can tell you colleagues are excited to be here as well and participate in the discussion. Governor, you have a lot of foresight to start this session talking about artificial intelligence, because this is about our future. This is about our common future. This is about how we're going to be making sure that we bring the growth, the productivity, the innovation in our society across the world. And you will probably know that Canada was the first country in the world to have a national strategy on AI. And we also have some of the brain trusts with Jeff Hinton, who won a Nobel Peace Prize, a Nobel Prize, not a Peace Prize yet, but a Nobel Prize for sure, and also Yoshua Benjo, which have been at the center. In Canada, following your thought, has always been about responsible AI and making sure that, you build the trust. And I would always say to my colleagues when we talk about AI that you need to build trust, because with trust, you will allow adoption and innovation. And that's really what you want to see. So responsible AI is going to be key in order to bridge the divide that you talked about and reaping up the benefits that's going to come with AI. And I can tell you, I was with one of the leaders, without mentioning him, because this is not exactly Chatham House if it's being streamed, but one of the leaders in the world, which I said, I'm 55. The only thing that I can think of general purpose technology in my life that have been game changers are probably the internet. Electricity was before me, so let's stick with internet. And I said, how would you compare? Because human brains are not very good at thinking exponentially. We're pretty good in a linear fashion, but if you want to see 30 years from now what the world is going to look like, it's a real challenge. So he closed his eyes and he said, Minister, I think that AI will be 100 times more powerful than the internet in terms of a game changer for society. And that night I came home and I said to my wife, assuming that he is 50% wrong, assuming that someone who likes to talk a lot and he's 50% wrong, that would be still 50%. And I said, assuming this is someone, if I told you he is, you would be guessing that he knows one or two things about microchips, because I think he passed now $4 trillion in market cap. And when I was with him, and I said, assuming it's 97% wrong, that would still be 3 times more than the internet that we have seen as transformational in our lives. And I just want to leave you with that. Just assume the impact that this could have on society. And you were right, Governor, to say that when I look at Africa and when I look at the potential of Africa, I think I saw numbers about 2035, 1.4 billion, certainly 3 to 4 trillion in the economy. Just think about the potential of AI on this continent and what we could do for humanity. So I think that this morning you will have a great panel with people who are going to bring perspective. But let's make sure that we build an AI for the people. Let's make sure that we have a people-centric AI, that citizens around the world see that AI is going to do something good for them. Because I would say, as someone who was industry minister, we introduced legislation in Canada. Citizens were always on the fence whether AI is going to be good or bad for them. And you mentioned about employment. I think this is going to be, this is going to affect employment, but I would think in a positive ways in many ways. It's going to amplify what people are going to be able to do in their work. So I would really urge this panel to talk about responsible AI, to make sure that we have, confidence building measures so that people in the street would see that AI would do good things for them. And I'll go back to my fundamental premise is once you have trust, then you have adoption and innovation. And that's really what we want to see this morning. So I really want to say thank you to South Africa for leading us, starting the G20 with a forward-looking panel like this one, which is quite amazing that you started with AI. I want to thank the panelists, and I want to thank Governor Tiff Macklem, the Governor of the Bank of Canada. He has been among the G7 colleagues and G7 governors at the forefront of that, and looking also what AI can do in the financial sector and how we can help people. So in conclusion, because I see I have 30 seconds left and they told me, Minister, you have to stick with the time, I would say let's seize the moment. Let's inspire the world. People are going to be watching the discussion this morning. Let's be ambitious, because I think AI has this great potential to change and to improve the lives of millions of people around the world. Let's make sure that we have responsible AI for all. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, to our host here in South Africa, thank you for your kindness. Thank you for making us dream big. And thank you for hosting us here in this beautiful city. Merci tout le monde. I should have said, now it's all over to Governor Macklem, who's going to be moderating this amazing panel. So Governor, make Canada proud. Lead us on AI. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Minister Champagne. And thank you for underlining very eloquently just the boundless opportunity of AI. And I am thrilled to be co-sponsoring this panel together with Lesetja on how to harness that tremendous potential, that boundless opportunity, and make sure it is working for our citizens. As you mentioned, Minister, Canada is the president of the G7 this year, and AI is one of our focus areas. And we're asking ourselves a number of questions. And the first one's a very basic question. Do we leave this to the market? Can we just let the market innovate and roll out AI? Or do we need to use our policy instruments to try to steer AI more, steer its development, steer its adoption, maximize its productivity gains, and ensure that it doesn't displace too many jobs? Second, how much can we expect AI to augment productivity, increase productivity growth? As Lesetja underlined, productivity is a huge challenge of our time. We all need more productivity growth. How much can we get, and when is it going to arrive? And then third, very similar to the G20 discussions, AI has tremendous potential in finance to make things faster, cheaper, more convenient for people, but it also poses some important financial stability risks. As we get underway with today's roundtable, I want to begin by introducing our keynote speaker, Susan Athey. Susan is professor of economic technology at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. And Professor Athey is a true leader in her field. Among her specializations are the economics of digitalization and how to use digital technologies for social impact. She has taught economics at MIT, at Harvard. She served for 6 years as consulting chief economist for Microsoft. She worked in the previous U.S. administration, as well as multiple private and public sector boards. And I can't think of anyone, Susan, who is better qualified with a well-rounded background to help us think through how to harness AI to benefit society. Just before I turn it over to Susan, I would like to, I will introduce the rest of the panel. I'm very delighted that we're joined by Geeta Gopinath, the first deputy managing director at the IMF. If you read Geeta's speeches as religiously as I do, you know she's been out ahead on a number of important questions related to AI, particularly how it will affect productivity and how it could magnify a downturn if we don't manage this well. Thrilled that Professor Lesetja Kganyago, Rector of the United Nations University and Undersecretary General of the United Nations, will join us virtually. Professor Marwala has had a long career as an AI engineer, a leading researcher in both AI theory and AI adoption, and I'm very much looking forward to his insights in terms of AI adoption, its effective productivity here on the continent of Africa. We're also very fortunate to be joined by the OECD Secretary General Matthias Cormann. The OECD has been actually working with the G7 to help us try to measure and monitor how AI is affecting our economies and how it's impacting productivity. I think, Matthias, you'll also have some good advice to all of us on how we can maximize the benefits. And finally, I'm delighted to welcome Mark Nasila. Mark is the Chief Data and Analytics Officer at First National Bank Risk, which is a division of First Rand, a leading financial services group here in South Africa. And he's going to talk about how AI is reshaping the work in financial services industry and the opportunities and the risks going forward. I want to thank all of you for joining us, and I know you're going to help us all. We're all going to come out of this thanks to you with a better understanding of AI. So with that, Professor Athey, I will give you the floor. Don't fall off.
Thank you so much for having me here today, and this is really an amazing panel to be a part of. As someone who's been working on the impact of AI for the last 15 or 20 years, it's a little tricky to try to boil down many conferences and panels to 10 minutes, but I'll do my best. One point that I wanted to begin with is that I think is especially important for policymakers is just that the technology adoption can go both fast and slow. And one of the risks is that sometimes the scary things and the dangerous things come fast, while the policy response, the measured, careful policy response that weighs all the costs and benefits can come slow. And it's, I think, incumbent on all of us to figure out how we can find policies and interventions to help deliver to our people the benefits as quickly as possible. Some of the places where it goes fast and we see things going very quickly are just any kind of cool new tool you can get through your browser or an app comes very fast. The search engine was adopted very, very quickly. I still remember the moment when a colleague showed me, how great this new cool thing was. But inside of businesses, you didn't need IT to let you in. You just went to your browser and it helped you with your work. And we're seeing that also very rapid adoption with this chat-based AI, and it is incredibly powerful. And if you look at FAST, if you look at our students in the universities, I mean, and even through lower parts of the educational system, the adoption is instantaneous. And at places like Stanford, basically, no one is coding, even the computer science majors, without the AI tools. We've had to completely change the way we evaluate students, and they're all writing and using these tools immediately. And also, the labor market has also very quickly adjusted in terms of hiring entry-level workers and what the big companies in Silicon Valley are looking for. So some of these changes are very fast. And coding tools are also something, you can install these AI coding tools in 5 minutes and get started. And anyone who writes anything technical, you can just beautifully produce equations and algebra and simulations just by speaking words into this machine. So that's very fast adoption, partly because it doesn't have a lot of dependencies on larger systems. Another place we see very fast adoption is things like spammers and scammers and misinformation campaigns and fraudsters and those that attack our financial systems and our beliefs. And so that is already here, and it's just going to accelerate as it becomes just easier and easier to simulate identity and everything. So another place that things get adopted on a more positive note very quickly is where AI is integrated into products and services. And so many of us, one of the first places we see it in our business lives is as it gets integrated into our productivity tools, our meetings, our virtual meetings, and our writing tools. And so this is also easier and faster because we've already gone through the cybersecurity. We've already given authentication to these products. They're already integrated. They've already overcome the switching cost, and the AI is just delivered to us immediately. But it can also go very slow if you're trying to adopt a new complex tool. And a lot of the big productivity gains that we can imagine are, automating so much information work that just involves moving things from one systems to another, if you think about it, how many terrible applications each of us has to use every week, applications that were spec'd out years ago and that we can't change. Well, there's a reason, it's not just technology, that we haven't improved all of our IT systems, all of our applications. It's because it takes time to figure out how to interconnect them with everything else. So that will take us quite a bit of time. But once we've sort of upgraded our software tools and we're into the modern era, after that, switching costs become very easy because the modern coding tools can update APIs, they can update connections, and they can make it much easier to move forward. And so when we think about the future, actually, I think the general purpose technology that's underappreciated is just the coding tools. The fact that we don't have to specify software with fixed criteria and interactions and APIs and then be stuck with it for the next 20 years. We'll be able to just add requirements and change interoperability very easily and quickly. So right now, people say, well, AI, like the biggest commercial applications, it's call centers, it's customer service, and it's coding. That's very specialized and niche. But coding affects everything. It affects the productivity of every bank, every government, every business. And in fact, it creates an opportunity for not rising inequality across firms, but actually leapfrogging. These tools can allow a small business that's today just placing orders and receiving orders on WhatsApp or WeChat or another text platform to just run their business, have the AI read all those texts and actually create the digital infrastructure, create the databases, and run their economies, their businesses more efficiently. And so when we think about what can we do as policymakers, we can make it easier for firms to adopt, and we can also ensure that we have the type of innovative environment that allows each country to have their own entrepreneurs that create software for their region, for their sector, for their industry, so that all firms will really be able to participate in this revolution. If we have a one-size-fits-all software for the world, it may not meet the needs of all of these different types of industries. Now, on the positive side, I'm actually fairly optimistic partly because of government attention and partly because of industry incentives, that we will not have a monopoly in LLMs. We have to pay close attention to that, but I do believe that it's unlikely that will happen because there's so many capable entities with the resources that are really do not have it in their interest for that to happen, be it governments, be it other competing firms, and firms that have access to data and that have their own barriers to entry. So some of those incumbents that have been problematic in the past could be the savior in the sense that those incumbents, there's reasons they're incumbents, there's reasons they have barrier to entry, and they will stick around to see another day, and they have time because of the slow adoption by enterprise and the slow switching costs, the high switching costs, to integrate AI into their products, which could lead to some mix, some incumbents getting displaced, but some making it through the transition. And that can support competition by competing large language models because all these different applications will have different needs. Some need to be lightweight, some need to know everything about everything, like if you're doing your homework, but they don't all have to be equally performant and they don't all have to have access to the same data. If we have that kind of competition, the implications for macroeconomics are profound. What's really key here is that prices fall as wages fall. Okay, and that seems kind of obvious, but I sit in a lot of these discussions with either labor economists or macroeconomists, and people aren't always connecting the dots, the full circle. There are a lot of cases where automation can happen, and this is a form of automation. It affects fixed costs, or we have firms with market power, and costs fall, but prices don't. And it's critical that we get the cost of healthcare down, that we get education quality up, and that we provide elder care, that we provide the services that governments spend so much of their money on, that we provide them efficiently, effectively, and that people can get the things that they need. If they see themselves being able to improve their quality of life, then they will hopefully be more invested in this transition. Operational efficiency by government is another huge opportunity, and it's too big a topic to go through, but I hope that leaders like yourselves will actually put together multi-country efforts to figure out how to become more efficient, share best practices, and also to rethink all of procurement. Because in the new world, we're going to be able to develop software very cheaply, and it all comes down to what should it do? You need to have people who can figure out what it should do for your people and how to implement it efficiently. Finally, I just wanted to pick up on some of the earlier comments about how to make AI safe and to make it trusted. This is going to require so much participation by so many people, and it's critical, in my view, that we have investments in R&D, that we have everybody from the universities to entrepreneurs participating in not just showing how great the technology is, but in making it trusted, making it safe, and not just trusted by the common citizen, but trusted by business. Somebody can tell you a technology is wonderful, but you can't let it run wild, copying data from one system to another inside your company unless you've actually tested it. You have independent assessments, and you need someone beside the company that made it to show you that it's safe. That requires investments. So these complementary investments are critical. Some of it comes from research funding, and we need to make sure we have the computing power and the data and the ability for all of the researchers around the world to assess this technology and to innovate it in a way that makes it useful and safe. But also we need to think about how the business community can share these digital public goods. The digital public goods, all the things that make this technology safe. So with that, I will turn it back to the rest of the panel. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Susan, and thank you for a very clear and compelling view on what the impacts of AI could look like. There's a lot to drill into, and I hope we have some time to do that. But one thing that really struck me was, I think one thing many of us have been worried about. There are huge economies of scale in AI. That has resulted in increased concentration. But the idea that actually the next phase could actually help smaller firms create more competition and potentially broaden the benefits I do want to drill in on that. But first, I do want to hear from our other panelists. We're going to start with Gita, followed by Chilidze, then Matthias, and then Mark. So Gita, over to you.
Thank you, Tiff, and it's a real pleasure to be here and to be on this panel. You know, it was 2 years ago that AI, generative AI, entered our collective conscience, especially with ChatGPT being rolled out. And so I asked myself, 2 years ago, there was a tremendous amount of uncertainty. There was a lot of excitement about the promises and concerns about the risks. And there was a question, is 2 years out, have we narrowed that range of uncertainty? And what I at least learned from my colleagues and the research that we've done at the IMF is that that level of uncertainty still remains very high. I think we should firstly recognize that we still are a ways from narrowing exactly and figuring out where this technology is going to take us. It's certainly, there's a lot of enthusiasm around it. Now, if you look at numbers like adoption rates around the world, we still don't really have that. I mean, that's very limited information. There's information for the US. About 40% of the labor force in the US claim that they have played with generative AI. 9% do that on a daily basis. So you are seeing adoption happening and take-up. Our analysis shows that about 40% of the global workforce is exposed to AI. If you look at advanced economies, that number is 60%. So this is clearly a general purpose technology with large amounts of exposure. But exposure doesn't mean a bad thing. It could be good. It could be raising productivity and complementing the worker, or it could be negative, which is displacing the worker, reducing their wage prospects. So let me give you a couple of examples. What we're already seeing, for example, is if you look at web designers and graphic designers, you do see the impact of AI, which is that it's reducing the demand for these skills. So there's been since 2021, there is every year about a 14% reduction in the vacancy share in these particular jobs, right? So you see AI playing out. And that may seem sensible to you. You might think, yeah, that sounds about right. But let me give you another profession, which is radiology, where there was a time when people said, well, with this technology, radiology is going to be, is there going to be hardly any demand for radiologists? And they've been saying that for a long time now, even before AI, generative AI. But that's not the case, actually, because what has happened, and this is Susan's point, which is that if the technology is so good, in this case, because AI is so good at reading images and does it so fast, that it reduces the cost of this kind of scans, which means that the demand for scans have gone up by so much that now the vacancy shares in radiology are growing every year 20%. So it's an annual, on an annual basis, there's a 20% increase in the vacancy share. So we have to be careful in terms of figuring out how this technology affects us, and it's still unclear. I think what is true is that it's going to have a very differential impact around the world. We have the advanced economy that has the AI preparedness, they have the digital infrastructure, they have the human capital and the sectors that are going to be most affected by it. So they get the biggest bang for the buck, I guess, while most emerging developing countries, low-income countries, don't really have that virtuous cycle. Our estimates of the effect on productivity are quite wide-ranging. We see growth could be higher by 0.1 percentage point in the medium term, or it could be as high as 0.5 percentage points. So it's, again, a fairly big range. So I'm just going to leave it with the fact that what is, I think, even despite all this uncertainty, what is quite clear from a policy perspective is that we need preparedness for AI, and that at the basic level are two things: the digital infrastructure and human capital. And so more that countries can do, emerging and developing countries can do in terms of building up that human capital and the skills that are appropriate for this, the digital infrastructure so that you encourage adoption, I think that's absolutely the first direction of travel. But there if you look from the policy world, there are many, many areas that are going to require attention, including fiscal policy. And we can come back to that if there's time.
Thank you, Gita. Very, very good advice. And I'm very pleased to see Chilidze on the screen. Chilidze, I'm going to turn it over to you.
No, thank you very much. I'm sad that I was not able to come and physically, but I'm glad that I'm here. Maybe just to add on what has been said, how we can be able to get AI to work, especially in the African continent. I think before I get that, I think we need to understand what really AI is. For me, I think it is data. With all its complications, how do we make sure that we democratize access to data? It involves data collection infrastructure, how you store it, and so on and so forth. Secondly, is algorithms themselves, and many of them are available for free. Thirdly, is computing infrastructure, which is actually quite important. And when you talk about AI, now you are talking about access to GPUs. That I used to be in the board of a bank, and it is becoming clear that banks must actually have access to quite high performance computing facilities. And then fourthly is how we actually apply AI. And now, given all that, what needs to be done? I think firstly, as it has already been said, we need to invest into this infrastructure. There are issues of financing that we need to think about, but it is very important. Secondly, we need to have a coherent and enabling policy framework. And this policy framework must include what areas can we be able to invest in. Speaking as a South African, I would say that issues of data infrastructure is quite critical, and issues of computing infrastructure is actually quite critical. And then thirdly is the issue of education. How do we reimagine education so that people are ready for AI? I used to be the Vice Chancellor of University of Johannesburg before, and one of the innovations we did in 2018 was to introduce an AI literacy course for all the students, which is very important. This is not a technical course. It's just to make people be literate enough to be able to use these technologies. And fourthly, we must actively invest in research and development. Fifthly, we need to trigger and sustain business entrepreneurship. What are some of the incentives that we need to put into place to ensure that the uptake of the AI economy is actually high? And then, of course, we need to partner. I don't think one country alone can be able to do it. We often have talked about the global north and the global south. AI is actually dividing the world into China and United States on one side and the rest of us. And we need to deal with how we can be able to ensure that it does not become another avenue of division. And we also, I want to come back to the issue of governance. AI must be governed. It must be governed, and when we govern it, we need to understand that it is a balancing effect. Some countries are more risk averse. Some countries are more opportunity seeking. Where you are on the Pareto optimal frontier is actually the values that you have to deal with. So, we always have to balance safety versus transparency and so on and so forth. Now, secondly, we need to change human behavior. What are some of the, not just human, also organizational behaviors of the people who are using it, of the people who are developing it, of the policymakers, and so on and so forth. We need to create incentives for the adoption of this technology. And now coming from the global south, we need to create policies and regulations. And of course, our parliaments must go and pass laws on AI. I just read the AI Act of the European Union. And as United Nations University, we are actually spending quite a great deal of time training policymakers so that they can be able to craft AI policies that are not going to stifle innovation, that are not going to stifle the economies, but are going to put on the guardrails, but ensure that the economy actually thrives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, GZ, and thank you in particular for underlining some of the areas where we as the G20 need to work together, and I want to come back to that. But first, I'm going to turn to Matthias, and then finally Mark. Matthias.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I mean, I guess the first point is, and we all know, productivity growth has been very slow over the last decade and a half, and been slowing even further, even just over the last few years, and with population aging in large parts of the world, that drag on productivity growth will only become more significant, and AI, there's no question, provides a very powerful opportunity to boost productivity growth, and hence also a very powerful opportunity to not just protect incomes and living standards, but drive increases in incomes and living standards. And I mean, it's been touched on by some of the previous speakers, but the productivity gains will of course vary across sectors and levels of adoption. However, the three key areas that we see is improving efficiency and the quality of business decision making, automating a wide range of tasks, and supporting skills development through personalized learning. I mean, in terms of efficiency and quality of business decision making, we already see a reduction in costs from generative AI in relation to marketing, certain customer service functions, supply chain management, and sales functions. And of course, AI can also help improve forecasting and provide real-time analysis to support decision-making in response to changing markets and business conditions. Now, what we see in terms of data across OECD countries, it also shows that the share of firms using AI is nearly double across the 10% of most productive firms compared to the 10% least productive firms. Now, in terms of automation of information work, or by taking on repetitive or routine tasks, AI enables workers to focus on more complex and creative activities. And in fact, 80% of workers that responded to a recent OECD survey in the manufacturing and finance sectors reported that AI had enhanced their performance at work. And we also conducted a survey of 6,000 mid-level managers across 6 OECD countries, which showed that nearly all of them across Europe and the United States were using algorithmic tools to manage workers and their tasks, with some room to increase adoption in Japan. A large majority of these managers say that algorithmic management improves the quality of their own decision making. Now, in terms of supporting skills development through personalized learning experiences, it's clear that, of course, the generative AI can provide a tailored, dynamic learning experience for workers, making it easier to acquire new and necessary skills, which of course will be essential as AI adoption grows. Now, as you know, Tiff, we prepared a working paper for Canada's G7 presidency, which we released last month, and which shows that AI adoption by G7 countries could increase aggregate labor productivity growth by between 0.4 and 1.3 percentage points annually in countries with particularly favorable conditions for adoptions, and that includes the United States and the UK, and by 0.2 to 0.8 percentage points in other G7 jurisdictions. And we're now working with the South African presidency to expand these estimates to a broader set of countries, and we will present those findings in September. Now, productivity gains in emerging and developing economies are currently expected to be more modest than in advanced economies, as knowledge-intensive services represent a smaller share of the economic activity. However, there are several key emerging economies, China and India, for example, which have developed very significant AI capabilities that may support broader adoption. And in low and middle income countries, smartphone and cloud-based access to AI may help leapfrog traditional infrastructure constraints. And I mean, as has been said by others, a sound policy framework that facilitates the safe and responsible use of AI and the people-centric development of AI will be key to fully realizing the significant upside benefits and opportunities of AI for humanity, but I'm happy to go through some of that, perhaps if there's time in the next segment.
Well, thank you, Matthias, and I am very grateful to the work you and your team have been doing on the measurement. Good policy starts with good measurement, but measuring the digital economy is harder than we think. Finally, Mark, I'm looking forward to your insights on the ground here in Africa.
Thank you so much. But firstly, I think it's important that we appreciate what this technology is doing. For the first time, we have a technology that is taking away tasks. In other words, it automates tasks, or it actually complements what people are doing, as opposed to when you reflect on the previous revolutions where technology actually provided multiple opportunities. What this means, it's important that we maybe make this conversation a value one. And by this, I mean that as policymakers, we need to articulate coming up with strategies on where this technology will help organizations. I think one of the biggest mistakes we've seen in the market is if you lead it as a technology perspective, then we impress the technology more than how the technology can work for organizations. But this also means spending time understanding where AI will play a role within the organizations, keeping in mind countries are very different from a socioeconomic perspective, and the role of AI will actually be very unique. Some organizations will strive for efficiency. Some organizations will strive for empowering people so that they can be more effective. And I've seen firsthand that if you get this part of the adoption wrong at the onset, you're likely to end up not integrating AI within organizations successfully. But the second part is also humanizing its adoption. And I know we talk about upskilling. There is no doubt that this technology today is affecting blue-collar jobs. The advent of generative AI, like the governor mentioned, is actually also affecting white-collar jobs. And it's important we understand its limitations as well. And this means that workforce planning becomes very, very critical. And this obviously is supported by strategic training, understanding that it's not just about acquiring knowledge about AI, but also being able to apply AI in the construct of what people do in their specific jobs or specific functions. And that planning becomes important. But that planning is also practical if we understand which industries or which sections will be impacted by AI. There is no one-size-fits-all or a blanket approach of saying, okay, we're all going to apply, we use AI in the same way. For example, there's areas in the bank where people are basically just using AI to reference it for driving better decisions. Then we have areas, for example, in our due diligence processes where AI is helping identify risks, provide insights and assessments, and therefore people are just focused on decision making. Then we have areas where AI is helping drive digital engagement, while other areas we're now using it to make sure that we're driving new ideas, new opportunities. And therefore we need to rethink and think of policies that understand AI's impact in the construct of opportunities that are available within organizations. And then the third point is that when you look at, for example, South Africa and African emerging markets, it's important to prioritize AI that augments how people work other than areas that takes away tasks, because the augmentation of what people are doing could be a transition to creating new opportunities, because by just protecting what is there does not necessarily mean we're actually creating new economies. And I'm saying this because sometimes we could easily get in what we call the productivity trap. AI does things faster, but to some extent, it does the same things which people are doing. So to go beyond that means thinking about industrialization of the future, and I'm seeing the emergence of AI factories. I was looking at the statistics. 9 out of the top 10 investors in AI today are the same 9 top manufacturing companies. And the reason for this is that beyond just productivity and efficiencies, we're looking at now AI factories. AI factories presents a whole new range of opportunities. There's lots of jobs and opportunities that come with hosting and localizing AI factories. And we're now going to shift from manufacturing products and services to manufacturing intelligence. And intelligence is what is going to drive this global world. And the last point is, when you look at, for example, the emerging economies, we don't have very big economies to make mistakes. It's important that we learn and avoid those costly mistakes. The early adopters paid a very big price in embarking on strategies and going back. And this means that looking at what could go wrong, potentially, unintended consequences, but also understanding the limitations of AI. I use an example by Klarna, one of the companies that decided, okay, we're going to automate and get rid of people. And then a few months later, they realized that the chatbot they had was making so many mistakes that it could not do what people were supposed to do. And that's one way you get mistakes. So at the onset, understanding what could go wrong and empowering people to do what technological not to do today. But having said that, I'm also looking forward to the rest of the discussion because I think the decisions we make today will impact how this technology affects not just this continent, but the whole world.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you for bringing the business perspective, the worker perspective, and the African perspective. Okay, so here's where the conversation gets a little pointier. I'm gonna try to pin you down a little more, and I'm gonna start with productivity. Look, I think we all know productivity solves so many problems. It's essential to rising standard of living. Productivity pays higher wages. For ministers of finance, it creates fiscal space. For central bank governors, it means our economies can grow faster without inflation. But as many have remarked, productivity growth has been harder to come by than we would like. And I think in every one of our G20 countries separately, there are things we need to do. I think that the question I want to pose at the beginning, and Shaliza, you touched on it, is so what does the G20 really have to do together? What are the things that we really have to focus on together here at the G20 to maximize the productivity benefits while minimizing the distributional risks? And Gita, maybe I'll start with you, and I'll turn it to Matthias and Mark, and then invite anybody else.
Yeah. So first, I think the G20 should continue to do what this panel is doing, which is to try and understand better how AI is affecting the economy. If I just took the range of numbers that got put out between me and Matthias, it went from 0.1% productivity growth to 1.3% a year productivity growth. So that is a very wide range. So I think we have to keep the business up of tracking how this technology is being used. The second aspect is, I think it is important, as being the G20, that this is a technology that does good for all parts of the world. And it's not one where the benefits of it are only going to the advanced economies who are ready to kind of hit the ground running with it, as opposed to developing economies. And we don't want an even bigger widening of the gap in per capita income. So the more that can be done in terms of ensuring that developing countries have the finances, have the technology to be able to invest in the infrastructure that's needed, be it digital, be it computing, ensure that their human skills are at the level that's required to use this technology very quickly, make sure that the firms understand also how this technology can be used to raise productivity. I mean, Susan was giving examples that it does matter, but how you use a particular app in your company. So working on that front is going to be very important. Second, we have to also step back and think about some of our policies, which are like fiscal policy in this era of AI. One, our social security nets, right? Are they ready for a transformation of the scale that we're talking about over here. We absolutely have the promise of some very good outcomes over time, but as we've known with past technologies, you can also go through a period of disruption, and you can have workers who are not able to match very quickly to a new job or a new opportunity. And so you could have an issue with long-term unemployed workers, much longer than what our social safety nets have been used to provide insurance for. So we have to step back and ask. Secondly, if you look at where our taxes are collected from, most of it is collected from labor income taxes and not capital income, just by the way capital income taxes are designed. If we move to a world where, suppose we end up in an environment where most of the income is capital income and less is labor income, I mean, where are we going to get the income share from? Again, planning ahead and thinking about it, making sure that you have the policies that are there for skilling workers, making sure that we don't have the problems that happened with previous technological booms, including with trade, where you've had lost communities and lost regions of the country. How do you make sure that that doesn't happen again in this time around? I think it's going to be very important. And we should also keep in mind that as with other technologies, you can get boom busts. So you talked about the internet. I think it was Minister Champagne also talked about the internet as being very important. As wonderful as the internet has been and as much as it's transformed all of our lives, it did go through a bust in 2001. So we should not be completely complacent about boom bust episodes, even with a technology like AI. So I think we should keep all of this in mind at the G20, think both about the short term, the medium term, and how to make sure that the benefits of AI are widely spread.
Thank you for making it very concrete. Matthias.
Well, thank you very much, Tiff. Well, firstly, I agree with Geeta that, of course, the G20 should continue to focus on data and analysis to more precisely define the opportunity and also to help inform discussions and decisions on the best ways forward. But we know enough about the upside benefits to also focus in on a range of other areas. And firstly, AI, as a general purpose technology, we need to really focus on the need for more universal access and opportunity to participate and benefit, which has implications for the level of investment in the digital infrastructure and the skills development side of the equation. And we need to really ensure that the benefits of AI can genuinely be widely shared across regions, firms, and population groups, and that it's not just adopted by the largest and most technologically advanced firms in a relatively concentrated group of countries. And certainly, right now, our data shows that large firms are more than twice as likely to adopt AI than small and medium-sized enterprises. That is within economies. And there are also, of course, big gaps in adoption across different sectors of the economy. So what do we need? We need wider diffusion and availability of AI, ensuring access for smaller firms and underrepresented sectors. We need to encourage competitive AI ecosystems by supporting a diverse range of developers and minimizing market concentration. Now, I heard the remarks of Susan earlier that she's quite optimistic, and perhaps that's right, but I think it's still something that we need to keep an eye on. We need to invest in the necessary skills, education, and human capital, and we need to, of course, empower the workforce through training and education to continue to move along with the opportunities, and the education system itself needs to have a much more targeted focus on improving AI literacy, and then through lifelong learning support the workforce to keep adapting to new AI-driven labor market requirements. Now, in terms of prioritizing human-centric AI adoption in the workplace by encouraging organizational changes that blend AI systems with human skills while ensuring the necessary trust, reliability, and responsible governance. And in terms of governance, we do need robust governance mechanisms to ensure AI safety, transparency, accountability, and ethical use. We need clear regulations on issues like data privacy, unbiased applications, and also mechanisms to address AI-driven misinformation. And all of that requires global collaboration, for which the G20 is the platform to help develop interoperable standards, share best practices, tackle cross-border AI-related challenges, and more generally engage in the necessary dialogue to help drive safe, trusted and beneficial development of AI technologies. I might leave it there, Tiff.
Thank you, Matthias. Mark.
The first foundation of getting it right is making sure that we spend time understanding where AI will play a role. And for South Africa, for example, identifying core sectors. This is keeping in mind of the amount of resources required. There's no country that can just do everything, or there's no organization or industry that can put money and do everything with AI. So identifying those niche areas becomes important. The second part is understanding what areas will result to products and services from AI that are needed, because also it doesn't help to go out there and invest resources, data scientists come up with products, but are not integrated in the way organizations operate or create products that are needed out there. I think the one thing that we're seeing in the market is there's a lot of AI products, but very few of them are actually resulting to value or helping organizations realize that efficiency. The third one is also equally investing in human intelligence. I think we've seen so much investment in technology itself, in large language models since the advent of ChatGPT. But as much as we also appreciate the limitations of this technology, we must equally invest in human skills that complement this technology so that we can have that human-machine partnership, because that partnership is critical in driving productivity. I gave a couple of examples, and we're seeing today that if you don't equip people with proper skills to actually be able to complement the technology within its process or within some platform, then the technology will be redundant. One of the things one of the frameworks I've actually socialized through my book, African Artificial Intelligence, is drawing a line between what humans do versus what technology does in every single task. And that is the only way you can upskill people, because you're upskilling people to where they're needed, as opposed to say, okay, we're going to repurpose. The technology today is changing so fast that tomorrow or in the next few years, you could be upskilled to a task that the technology will be coming to take over. So therefore, that strategic overview is important, so that you've got almost a workforce planning that is supported by targeted skilling to what will be needed in the next 4-5 years to come. And then the last one is to think beyond the immediate efficiency or the immediate productivity. I mentioned about AI factories, and this points towards sovereignty, because there's a whole new roles and functions that are being, opportunities that are being created beyond just the usage of AI. Data engineers, ethical practitioners, legal analysts, engineers in the data value chain, the digital world. All those are new opportunities that can be presented to drive employment and to drive a positive view of the role of AI in the job market.
Thank you, Mark. Partnership for productivity, I love it. I want to switch quickly to the labor market, and I'm going to turn first to you, Susan, and then Chiditsi. We've all read estimates of how many jobs AI is going to replace. Some of them are pretty scary. But the reality is jobs are collections of tasks, and AI does some tasks better than others. And as Geeta and Susan both underlined, if you drop the price of something a lot, the demand can go up. So really, two questions here. What is the empirical evidence so far? Where could we be going? And then importantly, what does the G20 do to help manage that transition and reduce the inequality and negative distributional effects? I'll start with you, Susan, and then Chiditsi.
Yeah, so one set of research I'd point people to is recent research by David Otter. It's still looking backwards, but he really articulates very crisply the point that actually in past innovations, we've seen very mixed effects in labor markets depending on how a technology exactly affects tasks. And if you take a job and the technology actually automates the things that were expensive and difficult to acquire, things that were inelastically supplied, expert types of tasks, then in fact you can remove barriers to entry to a job. It might reduce wages because it makes it easier to enter, but you might also expand employment. So if you take the hard parts of a job and make them easier, then more people can participate. So, of course, the people who had that expert skill are sad, but you have expanded access. And there are many services that we have right now in the economy where there are barriers to entry, at least barriers to entry to doing them well. And I think healthcare, education, services for the elderly are things that are big fiscally, and where, in principle, AI can reduce barriers to entry and allow people to shift into those fields where we really could benefit from that expanded output and lower costs, especially because governments pay for them. Of course, in other cases, it can automate the easy stuff, and the people who are left, actually the job mix is more expert-oriented, and that might raise wages for what's left. And I think we're seeing mixes of that already in the early adoption. And I think coding, which I've emphasized as such an important general purpose technology, you see a bit of a mix of both already, in the sense that the big tech firms who have a lot of experts and were paying a lot even for entry-level workers have basically really cut back very quickly on entry-level coders, because they don't need those people. They have the experts, together with AI coding, can create the same software they were before. But yet, the rest of the world has struggled. You know, even things as big as banks, the biggest bank in a country has struggled to hire software developers. And they have a long list of projects that were too expensive. They would take too long. The ROI was not there. So in this case, all of those developers, instead of all working for 4 big companies who bid up the price, now can diffuse throughout the economy. And I think the demand for software implementation can go up. And in general, the cost, one other feature that I think means we'll have so much more software developed and so many more software products is, again, that one of the costs of developing software is then you have to maintain it forever. There's so many problems you could fix with a summer intern, but then you have to actually take care of that software, update it, make sure the cybersecurity is there. But if updating and maintaining software becomes close to free through AI, then we can do so many more projects. So I think that that's just an example, but it's one where these competing effects are clear, and the role for policy in general can be quite profound, especially if we can remove barriers to entry in services where there's such a great social welfare benefit, and we can make them more accessible to the world.
Thank you. Chilidze, you've run a university, you're at the United Nations, and you've thought a lot about Africa. Your perspectives on how to make sure that this works for people?
No, thank you. But I think firstly, before I get into how to ensure that it works for people, just to say that in understanding the dynamics of labor market, I went back to the two-sector economy paper by Arthur Lewis. And he has this concept of a Lewis turning point. And at that point, he was studying the movement of labor from the agriculture to the industrial sector. And now we are seeing another shift, the movement of labor from physical human beings to AI-enabled machines. You know, and where that Lewis turning point is going to end, we do not know. But what we know is that the result is that the labor market is going to be smaller. The same way the agricultural labor market became smaller in that other revolution. When it becomes smaller, it becomes very important because the aggregate demand of goods and services, because what it does, the people will have less disposable income, and it's exacerbated by the fact that the people that remain in the jobs might not have the full spectrum of jobs because there's so much augmentation that you don't need somebody for 8 hours. Maybe you need them for 2 hours. So it's going to have an impact on aggregate demand, and we need to think about that going forward. But as universities, our role should be, how do we prepare the people for that economy? And of course, we can talk about literacy. We can talk about a new form of economy that is evolving, where a machine is now becoming a principal agent. We can talk about the infrastructure that is needed in the education sector. And when we come to the African continent, I think the role of digital platforms so that we can be able to scale the offerings to people is absolutely very, very necessary. And going to the existing workforce, it is clear that the existing workforce perhaps was not prepared for the economy that is emerging. Nobody is. How do we go back to the policy framework where we can reskill people? What are some of the incentives that they are? Tax incentives, whatever incentives that we can put into place so that people are incentivized to learn so that they can be able to thrive in this economy, so that we can minimize the bad side of this. Of course, the increased productivity might actually contribute towards much more resources for us to be able to deal with other issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Mark, I want to draw you in on this. You mentioned the importance of avoiding mistakes. And as you mentioned, there have been some examples of companies like Klarna, like IBM, that have reversed course. They froze hiring. Now they're actually, well, that was a mistake. Actually, we need people. But maybe you could just say a few more, drill down a bit more on that for us.
Yeah, thank you. So there's a lot of companies that have overestimated or even over-relying on AI as a technology. Based on what they're offering, and the example is Klarna, which is an online commodity store in Europe that actually decided, okay, we're going to drive engagement with customers fully using chatbots, and they decided to get rid of a certain proportion of their workforce because they felt the technology will do the same, and the result of this was chatbots that missed out on a lot of context, went round and around in conversations without providing clarity and solutions. And this company was forced to bring back the workforce. And the mistake they made is that on an onset, they did not assess the limitations of what chatbots could do. IBM did the same thing, I think, with the human capital space, where they felt, the technology could perform tasks. And when they realized that they were dealing with the issues and they had to even employ more people, the same people, which actually costs them more. The third example is we're going to see, and we're seeing a lot of retrenchments coming from the fact that there've been so much investment in the technology that it's actually not bringing in that expected return on investment, and therefore people have to pay the cost because of cost-cutting mechanisms. And therefore, I think organizations need to make sure they set themselves up by understanding up to what extent will technology play a role in automating tasks, and where do people come in. And this is not a new construct. You can go back to history. I think 2014, Facebook launched a chatbot, and it was so chaotic because the chatbot could only handle 30% of conversations, and this other 70 could have been done with people. I think it's important to not underestimate the role of people in this value chain of AI. The investments in human intelligence today are very, very low. And when we talk about human intelligence, we're talking about skills that drive things like reasoning, critical thinking, problem solving, being able to identify opportunities. And maybe this goes just beyond work, and looking at, some of the curriculum, early childhood learning, some of the being able to logically solve problems, you need to, children need to learn it at the onset of the curricula so that it can prepare them into, the future workforce.
Thank you. We do need to learn from these experiences. Okay, I've got one final question. I'm going to go to Susan, and then I'm going to take a few questions from the audience. Susan, you briefly touched on the potential to improve the productivity, the delivery of government services, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, central banks, ministries of finance. Perhaps you could say a few words on where should we be focusing?
Yeah, so I recently spent 2 years in government, and one of my initiatives there was to try to hire new people and also get funds to do technology modernization. And it really gave me a perspective on how challenging it can be to make long-term investments in government IT, and in people, especially when the private sector opportunities are so great. But I think this change in the production technology of software and of services really creates an opportunity for us to rethink everything. And again, some of the constraints, and this is true for governments and for big companies, is that just the procurement cycles are very difficult. And then you have to specify something, like you have to, in advance, say what you're going to do, and then you're kind of stuck with it. And then you have this web of interconnected products, which makes it very difficult to change. So I think as we go forward, we have this opportunity to really take more of a design-based approach to what our citizens want and what they need, and to be able to be much more responsive and much more nimble in providing it and creating it and improving it. And that approach is really kind of antithetical to the way I think a lot of governments and big bureaucratic companies have operated in the past. And also getting back to what are the skills? So if coding, or at least writing a couple of pages of code, has become very easy, it's not that creating a product is completely easy. You still have to decide what needs to be done. And I think that in some sense, getting back to also this leapfrogging or catching up point, it used to be that you needed this very arcane and detailed skills about all the details of a specific programming language to write great production quality code. A lot of that is now automated, but the part about architecting it and deciding is not. So in some sense now, if you're reskilling people, now it's not that they need to spend years learning the details of coding, but they need to learn how to think, and then need to learn how to solve problems, to identify problems, assess problems, and also manage relatively low-cost vendors who can deliver for you products. But what do you do if it actually all becomes very cheap? We haven't really thought of that, about how to implement that. And I think companies don't know it yet, and neither do governments. That's one reason we're not going to see the immediate productivity numbers pop up, because we don't actually know what to do with this new tool that we have. So that's partly why I think there'll be a lot of benefit to information sharing, collaboration, best practices. One of the things that these software products are also very much public goods, in the sense that if you make something, a teacher assistant work in one country, it can be adapted in another country. So these digital public goods, sort of like a teacher assistant in a box, just like we have chatbots in a box, I think there's a lot of opportunity for public service, digital public goods and service provision, where it used to be so difficult to adapt something, now it will be easy to adapt it to a context. So there are many, many things to be worried about, but those are things I'm excited about, and I think we can get to work building things rather than just fret about it and only watch the numbers and watch passively what happens.
Thank you. Procurement, I think learning, you're right, and we have been trying to learn from each other. I will say my observation is, getting back to where you started, some things are fast, some things are slow. It can be pretty fast to develop a prototype of something. It can be pretty slow to scale that up and deploy it across your organization. So with that, I'll take, let's say I'll take 3 questions and put it back to the panel, and then we'll see where we are. So put your hand up if you have a question. Yes, over there. Here comes the mic.
Thank you very much for the presentation so
And
far.
please, I should have said, just identify yourself too.
Oh,
for
my
everybody.
name is Yabo Masha, and I'm the director of the G24. The question I have is from a financial stability perspective. With AI, markets have that ability to react quickly to new information, and I'm curious to know what, from the perspective of a policymaker, a central banker, how should they prepare themselves to manage the reactions and also the potential impact of that on financial stability? Thank you.
Thank you. Hold off. Another question? Yes, please.
Thank you. Maybe to Shritzi, my friend on screen, and to Susan. Shritzi, this is Ed Kieswetter. In the case of South African Revenue Service, we've actually been able to accelerate our deployment of AI quite significantly and beneficially for taxpayers because there wasn't a clear policy environment. I think policy would have constrained us. But I am also a believer that you need guardrails, you need policy to guide us. But often as a practitioner, my sense is that policy doesn't always understand its nexus with practice. So how should we think about closing the policy practice gap so that we reach that Goldilocks point where it neither constrains us to be adventurous and to experiment, but neither allow us to be too adventurous that we cause unintended harm?
Yes, Pablo.
Thank you very much for a wonderful panel. Pablo Hernandez, BIS General Manager. I wanted to ask Gita and Matthias on the numbers. Gita was emphasizing at the start of her presentation the uncertainty, and of course a good example of the uncertainty is the numbers, the weight range of figures that you were providing. The question, let me put it in a very specific way. Can we translate the numbers that you've produced into growth numbers as well? Because these were numbers that were focused on productivity. But this will be at the cost of lower potential labor and employment, or it is basically TFP what we are talking here, total factor productivity, and therefore we can be optimistic of these numbers generating in the end also higher growth potential for our economies. And maybe you can provide also whether you've worked on trying to make compatible the numbers so that we are confident that we can compare them. Thank you.
Thank you, Pablo. Okay, we've got growth and productivity, we've got financial stability, we've got deployment and adoption. Perfect. So I'm just going to turn it back to the panel, and I'll start with you, Gita, and then I'll go to Chalitzi, Susan, Matthias, and Mark.
Yeah. So Pablo, to your question, the numbers I was giving were on growth. So they were not productivity, but there's a very close. So I have seen enough estimates at this point that we could translate the range of 0.1 to 1.3 as what people are predicting for growth on an annual basis in the medium term. So it is a very wide range, I think. And in terms of reconciling, I think we have to wait to get a little better sense of how the technology is delivering returns. As several people have pointed out, there is a lot of enthusiasm behind it. All companies are investing quite heavily, especially in the advanced economies, they're investing in this technology, but if you actually see the returns for them in terms of that investment, they're actually quite low at this time. So it is more of there's a very strong belief that this will pay off, but we're not really seeing that in the data. And in terms of scenarios, of course, we haven't even started talking about what happens when you have totally true artificial general intelligence, which is the other scenario where you have people who, fully functioning artificial humans. which is also one of the scenarios people look at. So I think we're still in this range of considerable uncertainty. People talk about agentic AI, but again, we haven't really gotten there yet. We've seen pieces of it. I'll speak to the question on the financial sector implications and consequences for financial stability. So we've thought about this, and we've obviously think about this a lot at the IMF. I mean, on the plus side, because this technology has the ability to synthesize much larger information than the typical boxes that have been used to produce it, you could end up with better resource allocation in terms of how money is lent and who it is lent to. So that, there is that promise of that, and that obviously is always very good for financial stability reasons. But that said, I think there are also important risks associated with it. One risk that we should all keep in mind is that, this technology ultimately is being developed based on existing data, right? I mean, it uses the information, the episodes, what exists in current data, which means if for some reason the financial sector starts using this for making investment decisions, and you have a completely tail event like the pandemic that happened in 2020 appear, you're going to have to be very careful that you're not using these black boxes just mechanically to react to a black swan event. Because by design, this is not supposed to be a technology that it's generative based on historical information. So we have to be careful. There has to be absolutely a human hand on important investment decisions being made. And at least what we see so far in terms of our financial sector surveillance is that there is sufficient caution in the way the technology is being used. And of course, then there is the other side, which comes with cybersecurity risks and so on. But again, AI can actually be very helpful in all of this, which is also in terms of supervision. AI can be used as a tool in this area too. So again, here it is super important for policymakers to be ahead of the curve and to move quickly in terms of seeing the developments in the financial sector and making sure you're regulating it well.
Thank you, Geeta. We're running a bit short of time, so just maybe 1 minute each. Chilizi, over to you.
No, thank you very much, and good to see you, Ed. I think governance is obviously quite important. For me, I think whatever governance model we adopt, it must be based on the principle of maximizing the benefits and minimizing the risks. And it's quite important that we are not saying eliminating the risk, because if you eliminate the risk, you do nothing, and as a result, those very important deployment that you have done at our revenue services would not happen. Of course, the other complications is that while we are formulating policies, we should understand that policies actually appear at different places. You have international policies, and in this context, the issue of cross-border data flow, which is severely restricted in certain areas, such as the medical fraternity. You have policies that happen at the national level. And you have even huge amount of policies that actually happen at the private sector level. IEEE has all sorts of governance models on how to do this. And I think being able to balance all these three levels at which policies actually happen to ensure that while you maximize the benefit and minimize the risks becomes quite important. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan.
Yeah, so maybe one quick comment just on the adoption costs and time. I do think that some of the things that are most powerful for operational efficiency do take longer because they involve existing systems, existing data, inventory management. When I work with firms that are trying to do this adoption, a lot of them, even very big firms, are still not where they need to be in just the basic digitization, and they're managing inventory off of Excel spreadsheets and humans looking at them, and there's a long way to go between that and sort of a fully optimized system. And actually, you spend the first year just getting ready to get started. And so I think that's been the journey over the last 20 years, is that the early stages of digitization are so time-consuming and expensive that you don't see the ROI immediately. On the other hand, some of these things that are purely text-based and that are like new products are not as interoperable. They're not as maybe as fundamental to profits, but they're very quick to adopt. One other point I wanted to just tie together some of the earlier comments that I made is that we do see a lot of potential for industry restructuring because of the change in scale economies. So software has become a bigger and bigger part of the production function of a firm, both small firms and big firms. And as we've changed those entry barriers and changed how much data you need to be good at something, for certain tasks, now you don't need a lot of data to be good at something. And I've seen that in my research, and I've seen that across many firms. And so I do think we can see changes in scale economies leading to changes in industry structure, changes in where things are produced, changes in which countries are contributing. So that restructuring, I think, is on the horizon. And so that's one of the reasons I keep emphasizing the software development component of it, because in the end, that's a component of productive efficiency that affects both very small firms, but it's also been a huge source of profits for big financial firms and for big tech firms. And digital capability we can see leapfrogging, we can see restructuring. So that's something to really keep an eye on with these big changes in where scale economies lie.
Thank you. Matthias and Mark, I'm afraid you're down to 30 seconds each.
Well, I'll be very quick on growth. Well, our focus has been both on labor productivity and total factor productivity opportunities from AI. And the reason why there is a wide range is that, I mean, obviously, as always, it goes to the different assumptions in terms of speed and extent of adoption across different sectors. But overall, I think the direction of traffic is very clear, and we just need to get the policy settings right to optimize the opportunities. In terms of financial stability, as has been mentioned, well, there are also opportunities to improve financial stability. In terms of improved risk management, in terms of improved operational efficiency of central banks, Tiff, in terms of enhanced data insights. Yes, there are risks. And they've been well articulated, and I guess what central banks need to do is what businesses and organizations across the economy have to do, and that is to ensure that they invest in the necessary talent and technology to be able to manage some of those risks and to give themselves the data governance frameworks, the model explainability and the various systems and processes to manage this risk in the best possible way.
Thank you. Mark.
So firstly, the value of any strategy comes from what you measure, and I think it pays to having frameworks of articulating clearly how you measure value from AI across all use cases or opportunities. While we do have macro estimations, if you don't have a framework for articulating what AI is doing, it becomes very, very difficult to even ascertain whether you're creating any value or not based on the role of AI. And I think at the advent of ChatGPT and the conversation around generative AI obviously was more hyped around the fact that this technology generated human-like text. But I think what we learned over time is that to make this technology work goes beyond just generating text. There are processes we need to think about. There's data complexities, infrastructure, transforming the way people work, change management, including the complexities around ethical and responsible use of data within different opportunities. And therefore, maybe the market should have had this holistic view to be able to create a realistic view. I think, in my view, we had what we call the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you could overstate the value of a technology just by itself, and then you realize that its envisaged value becomes very difficult to implement because there are other building blocks that will be required to make it practical. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And look, my closing task is very easy. I'm not going to try to summarize. I will just say, yes, there's a lot of uncertainty, but the private sector is not standing still, and we cannot stand still either. And I think this panel has been tremendous. You've given us a lot of things, some clear areas to focus on, and for that, I am very grateful. Tremendous. Thank you. And now I'll turn back to Lesetja to pull this all together and send us on our way.
Thank you. What a fantastic panel. 5 takeaways. One is that we need AI literacy. And when we talk about literacy, we tend to talk about the public. But very clearly for me, policymakers need AI literacy. And let us not forget the people who have to pass the laws that they would need literacy in this. 2 is that policy is important. We have got to put policy to guide the development of AI. But in so many instances, policy lags behind. And before we formulate policy, we must understand the area that we are formulating policy about. So if we are not yet literate about it, I do not know how we are going to put the policies in place. So we are going to face a big challenge of policy, and it looks like policy would have to be formulated tantamount to fixing an aircraft that is already in flight. Thirdly, is that there will be big impact on the labor market, but we do not know to what extent. Some of the anecdotes that would come is, so many jobs would disappear. But there are areas where the deployment of AI actually resulted in the demand for people in that area. So it is it's going to be important. Clearly, benefits for financial stability I had seen, and a lot had been put on the analysis how quickly we can process stuff. But there is another aspect that is being missed. This industry is fast becoming very concentrated, and whether you are talking about algorithms and data and so forth, that is getting concentrated in very few actors, and the sector that we regulate use that limited group of expertise in the AI space, and we might face a concentration risk that we are going to have to deal with. And lastly, Minister Champagne would be very disappointed if I do not say that, of course, we must try to give this a human face and bring a lot of the population with us. With that, thank you very much for your participation. It's AI. There is another AI session. It's about AI and finance. And by the time we leave KwaZulu-Natal, we will be out AI'd.